At 3:20 a.m., long-range missiles entered the airspace over Belgorod, marking the final phase of a planned operation that had been unfolding for weeks. According to operational accounts, Ukrainian forces had already worked to exhaust local air defenses, disrupt logistics, and stretch response times. Within hours of the strikes, rail traffic slowed, fuel distribution was interrupted, and emergency measures were implemented across the city. While physical damage was reported at several infrastructure points, analysts noted that the more significant effects were economic losses, delays in military sustainment, and the mounting strategic pressure placed on Russian logistics. Belgorod, though not considered a frontline city, has played a crucial role in Russia's military network. With a population of roughly 330,000 and positioned about 35 to 40 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, it has operated as a rear-area transit hub rather than a battlefield. Multiple railway lines, freight yards, and road networks run through the city, moving ammunition, fuel, vehicles, spare parts, and personnel toward Russian units operating in northeastern Ukraine. Fuel storage facilities, warehouses, power distribution points, and communications infrastructure are embedded throughout industrial and residential districts, creating an environment where civilian and military systems overlap. To safeguard these assets, Russian air defense systems were deployed inside and around Belgorod, including positions near transport corridors and industrial sites. As a result, residential neighborhoods became part of the same defensive envelope as military logistics nodes. At peak movement, dozens of military supply trains reportedly pass through the city each day, and any disruption to a rail junction or fuel depot can slow resupply operations further south and west. Although Belgorod functions as a logistical base rather than an active combat zone, its integration into military movement has placed it firmly within the operational reach of the conflict. Before the missile strikes, Ukrainian planning relied on an extended period of intelligence gathering and defensive exhaustion. Satellite surveillance monitored rail volumes, fuel activity, power nodes, and air defense positions. Open-source indicators helped refine assessments of daily routines and logistical patterns. Once Ukrainian analysts confirmed consistent behaviors, decoy drones and low-cost aerial platforms were introduced to trigger Russian defensive responses. These interactions revealed radar coverage, response timing, and firing priorities, while also forcing Russian units to expend interceptors and maintain prolonged periods of high alert. By the time the long-range missiles were launched, the defensive network had already been pressured and partially depleted. The combination of reconnaissance, shaping actions, and targeted strikes produced an operation aimed not only at infrastructure damage, but at undermining Russia's ability to sustain logistics and maintain a resilient air defense posture. More reports and analysis are expected as authorities review the aftermath of the operation. Subscribe for continued coverage and deeper examination of developments in the region. As decoy drones began entering Belgorod's airspace at approximately 2 a.m., Russian air defense units were compelled to activate multiple layers of their protection network. Initial responses came from short-range systems such as Pantsir S-1 batteries positioned near rail yards, fuel depots, and power distribution sites. These systems engaged low-flying objects with radar-guided interceptors, initiating a series of alerts across the city's logistics corridors and industrial districts. As drone activity persisted, Russia expanded its defensive posture, activating long-range S-300 and S-400 surveillance radars to track wider airspace sectors. Although these systems did not always launch missiles, their continuous operation increased electromagnetic emissions and raised workload across command centers. Defense analysts reported that the cost imbalance created during this phase was significant. The decoy drones, valued at only a fraction of the cost of the interceptors fired against them, forced Russian air defense units to expend ammunition and maintain prolonged readiness. Repeated alerts contributed to crew fatigue, reduced decision speed, and heightened risk of misallocation of defensive resources. Operational pressure grew as command chains managed continuous radar activity, interceptor launches, and overlapping threat notifications. These engagements allowed Ukrainian planners to observe defensive behavior patterns, including preferred firing zones, reaction timing, and system prioritization. As the drone incursions intensified, the defensive system experienced structural strain. Radar units operated continuously, limiting concealment and increasing predictability. Air defense crews cycled through extended alert periods with minimal recovery time, creating conditions for degraded performance. Missile stocks declined faster than resupply schedules allowed, forcing Russian commanders to adjust coverage priorities and accept vulnerabilities in certain sectors. The financial burden of maintaining this posture also rose. Sustained radar operation, interceptor replacement, and continuous manning contributed to rising expenditures even before the first missile strike occurred. Once assessments indicated that Russian defenses had been sufficiently stressed, Ukraine advanced to the direct strike phase of the operation. At 3:20 a.m., Neptune long-range missiles were introduced into the battlespace. The system's heavy warhead and extended range made it suitable for fixed logistics infrastructure, such as fuel storage areas, large depots, and key nodes supporting rail and road movement. The objective was not widespread destruction, but targeted disruption capable of halting logistics throughput across multiple routes simultaneously. A successful hit on a fuel site could halt transport operations for days, with fires, shutdowns, and rerouting adding to delays. Following the initial impacts, Ukrainian forces employed HIMARS launch systems to strike smaller but operationally critical points, including rail junctions, power links, transfer yards, and staging areas. These targets were selected for their ability to create disproportionate delays with minimal expenditure. A damaged rail switch or substation could halt thousands of tons of cargo movement. The coordinated sequence, Neptune strikes to cause shock and HIMARS strikes to exploit resulting disarray, compress Russia's response time and maximize logistical interruption. When strikes occurred inside Belgorod's urban area, civilian systems were immediately affected. Power outages, halted rail traffic, and road closures emerged as collateral results of attacks aimed at military-linked infrastructure embedded within the city. Freight yards used for dual civilian-military transport were forced to suspend operations. Local authorities initiated partial evacuations, restricted access to several districts, and redirected emergency services toward industrial corridors. Videos recorded by residents showed explosions, fires, and smoke rising near residential blocks and industrial facilities, circulating on social networks before official statements were released. Economic effects began accumulating within hours. Interruptions in power and transport systems delayed commercial shipments and disrupted food supply chains, while military convoys faced rerouting and extended transit times. Rail bottlenecks created secondary delays across broader regional networks. The visibility of these disruptions removed any distance between the conflict and Belgorod's civilian population. Evidence recorded from inside the city limited the effectiveness of official denials or attempts to frame the events as isolated incidents. As authorities worked to stabilize essential services, the full scope of logistical and operational disruption continued to unfold. In the aftermath of the strikes, military analysts reported that Belgorod's role within the broader conflict had undergone a measurable shift. What had previously served as a stable logistics hub now required substantial defensive reinforcement. Russia moved to reallocate air defense systems to protect the city and its surrounding infrastructure, diverting assets away from frontline sectors and other regions. This redistribution reduced defensive depth across multiple operational areas, creating vulnerabilities that were not present before the repeated strikes. Command resources, interceptor stocks, and radar units that had once been distributed across a wider theater were increasingly concentrated around Belgorod, altering Russia's strategic priorities. Economic costs also escalated. Maintaining a continuous high-alert posture demanded persistent radar operation, regular crew rotations, missile replenishment, and emergency infrastructure repairs. Estimates indicated that sustaining this level of defensive readiness for 1 month could cost between $200 and $300 million when factoring in radar use, interceptor launches, fuel consumption, maintenance, and personnel requirements. These expenditures did not contribute to offensive capability and instead represented an ongoing financial commitment imposed without corresponding gains on the battlefield. Infrastructure disruption compounded the strain. Damage to rail junctions, power nodes, and fuel facilities forced authorities to reroute convoys, delay scheduled shipments, and conduct rapid repair operations. Thousands of tons of cargo faced delays across both civilian and military supply chains. Units operating further south and west experienced slower resupply tempos, which affected equipment availability and disrupted planned operational cycles. Each interruption required additional logistics coordination, pushing more resources toward maintaining basic flow rather than expanding operational reach. Political pressure increased alongside the economic and logistical burdens. Residents of Belgorod, experiencing power outages, transport restrictions, emergency evacuations, and visible explosions inside the city, demanded enhanced protection and clearer communication from authorities. Local officials were required to prioritize defensive measures and emergency management, often at the expense of broader strategic considerations. This internal pressure diverted attention from external objectives and contributed to an environment in which maintaining stability in Belgorod became a central requirement rather than a supporting task. Over time, the cumulative effect of sustained strikes, heightened defensive requirements, and recurring disruptions transformed Belgorod from an advantageous logistics center into a resource burden. The city began absorbing disproportionate amounts of air defense capacity, financial resources, and command oversight. Instead of enabling operations, it increasingly constrained them. According to strategic assessments, this outcome aligned with Ukraine's broader operational approach, which focused not only on physical damage, but on forcing Russia to expend resources, alter defensive postures, and confront long-term costs. The events in Belgorod demonstrated how modern warfare can exert pressure without territorial advances. By targeting logistics networks, air defense behavior, and the economic stability of support hubs, Ukrainian forces illustrated that operational impact can be achieved through shaping actions as much as direct strikes. Decoys, intelligence gathering, timing, and targeted weapon employment combined to produce a cascading effect that extended beyond individual hits. As the conflict continues, analysts suggest that similar operations may shape future engagements in regions where military infrastructure is embedded within civilian environments. For continued coverage of development,